The Annulus. Journey into the unknown. Through the vortex. Y. Sengyang. Copyright at 2020 Y. Sengyang. All rights reserved. The characters and events portrayed in this book are fictitious. Any similarity to real persons, living or dead, is coincidental and not intended by the author. No part of this book may be reproduced, or stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, or otherwise, without express written permission of the publisher. Chapter 11. What is happening? Just after dawn Pacific time, the scientific task force members were roused from their camp beds in the command center by ringing mobile phones. A Humvee ride to the city airport, and then a military jet took Professor Brown, Ken Harding, and the others to Ronald Reagan National Airport and then to the White House by police escorts. Within the hour on touchdown in Washington, all were assembled again in the White House Situation Room to review the issues confronting the world. President Walker walked into the Situation Room and took his seat with the science team on his right and the military on his left. General Stanton started the briefing to President Walker. We have good news and bad news. First, the good news, as all of you can see from the video feed live from Diablo Canyon, the light clouds and dome have disappeared. Also, we now have confirmation that the debris of the missing AH-64E attack helicopters has been found. It is very strange as only non-metallic parts of the choppers were found, all metallic parts have disappeared. Even more strange, the crews were found stunned and left on the embankment of the reservoir overlooking the nuclear power plant but with no memory of how they got there. He gave a look in President Walker's direction, who nodded his head. And now the really bad news is that the light clouds have appeared over Chernobyl. Ken and Professor Brown, who had viewed the downloaded videos and photos on the plane journey from California, brought out their notes and entered a spirited discussion. After a few minutes, General Stanton asked the question to the science team, well, Professor Brown, Dr. Harding, I think you have met Alastair Campbell. He is from the NSA and is a nuclear technology expert. Professor Brown and Ken both nodded their heads in the direction of Alastair, and then Professor Brown stood up and walked to the projection screen to ask a question to General Stanton. General, so there is no more presence at Diablo Canyon? And they left behind nothing? But are we sure they have taken nothing with them except for parts of the choppers? General Stanton was a bit taken aback by the question. Yes, Professor Brown, except for the metal parts of the AH-64E debris nothing has been taken. But just in case we need to, we have a surveillance chopper from Nellis equipped with all the sensing equipment that you and Dr. Harding have recommended we should use after the Sun Valley incident. They are sweeping the power plant site as we speak. Ken came up to join Professor Brown and took a marker pen and circled one of the photos taken earlier by the surveillance choppers with multi-frequency scanner sweeps over Diablo Canyon site. General, this is a radiation sweep of the plant before and after the dome appeared. Do you have a close view of this area of the complex? I would like the chopper to look at something right here. General Stanton called the operation center at Trellis Air Force Base. General Wayne then directed the chopper's cameras to home in on the area in question. Within a few minutes, the video images were fed to the White House. Ken stood up and walked to the screen and pointed to one of the images and said, "Get the cameras to zoom in on this spot." The screen showed an area of the power plant that seemed to have attracted the interest of the light clouds the day before. And was the first to join Ken at the screen and pointed to patches on different color on those videos. What is this right here? Alastair Campbell, I am familiar with the Diablo power plant. That is the roof of the building of the cooling pool where the spent fuel rods are stored before they are moved to the dry fuel storage silos. From the photos I see here, something is not the same before and after. Did we move some of the fuel rods during the evacuation? General Stanton's face turned pale for a moment and called Colonel Owen, still in command of the site, to investigate. Within 10 minutes, the personnel who went back into the power plant to inspect the fuel storage pool reported back. The pool, which was half full of spent fuel rods, was now empty. Everyone just sat back in their seats and looked gloomy and worried. And then asked a question that broke the silence. Well, they did not get the other spent fuel in the silos. If we find out the reason for that, we may be able to understand more of their modus operandi. Alastair Campbell pointed to the photos of the fuel silos with the erosion marks on their outer casing. Spent fuel canisters are constructed from multiply materials, comprising of special stainless steel, concrete in large thicknesses to shield the radiation from the stored fuel rods within. Anne and Ken ran the photos under a desktop magnifying viewer. They looked at the video feed on the screen and said to Alastair, "They have been trying to get inside the spent fuel storage silos. Look here, the other layer has disappeared, here, and on every one of the fuel canisters. From the film and video, we cannot be certain whether they have penetrated the inner vessel. Alastair, we can call up our instrumentation monitoring of the weight of each canister. Just wait while I call up the information from the Diablo Canyon computer system." Okay, here we go. All fuel canisters' weights check out correctly. It seems no spent fuel has been taken. General Stanton, our recon helicopter is on site, and we will have close-up video feed in a few minutes. Alastair cut in, "No, get the elevator trucks to do the close-up. There are a few parked just nearby within the power plant." Orders were given and elevator trucks which are used for high-voltage transmission line work were brought in from the depot adjacent to nuclear power plant. Thorough inspections were made of the waste fuel storage silos, especially in way of the wear marks. The plant manager reported that on close-up inspection, there was evidence of material being eroded from the smooth surface of the fuel storage silos and the layer below was exposed in places. Ken, General Stanton, General Wayne, it seems that something stopped them from penetrating the fuel storage silo casing. Professor Brown, the steel and concrete multilayer casing may have something to do with that. And asked, can we assume that they were attracted to the spent nuclear fuel but was foiled from getting at it? But why did they stop when they were already getting through? It was just a matter of time. Ken, we do not understand why they stopped suddenly in their attempts to penetrate the fuel storage silos. Lucky they did not get through, we narrowly averted the disaster that would have resulted from the fuel being exposed. Professor Brown, we were monitoring the activity of the dome and just before it vanished, the data telemetry showed a surge of extremely narrow-band ultra-high-frequency energy that exhibited directional focus. It is probable some sort of communication exchange happened between the light cloud entities and their command location wherever that may be. Alastair, we have now confirmed the content of the fuel silos are intact as that they did not penetrate the intermediate shielding, but they indeed seem to have taken the spent fuel rods in the cooling pool. Alastair put a call through to the Diablo Canyon plant manager to ask how many fuel rods were stored there. He put down the phone and looked at the assembled people in the White House conference room. We are lucky that the plant management had just cleared most of the spent fuel rod assemblies for storage into spent fuel canisters. So those entities only got the remaining 5 tons of fuel rod assemblies. Ken asked, Alastair, may I ask about the material of the fuel canisters? Alastair, each fuel canister has an inner and the outer shell built from special stainless steel and special reinforced concrete. In between there is the neutron shield from lead aluminium plating with boron carbide cladding. And, so what are we seeing in the photos and film? The light clouds try to peel away the concrete outer shell but not being able to get through to the inner layer, well at least in the time frame the dome stay energized. Ken, yes, and very astute observation again. The boron carbide lead neutron shield is somehow able to block the actions of the light clouds. The PA to the president came in and whispered into his ear, who then spoke to General Stanton and then Professor Brown. President Walker gave a slight tap on the conference tabletop to get everyone's attention. Listen up everyone, the Japanese Prime Minister just called. I am leaving you to take his call. But I understand from our ambassador to Japan, the light clouds have shown up over Fukushima. Let the Japanese tell us more. Meanwhile I want our best team out on the next flight to Chernobyl. General Stanton and Professor Brown will brief you on your mission. We will have to do a separate arrangement for Japan depending on what the Japanese are reporting about those light clouds actions there. Chief High Priest Zevon and his security chief Zachary walked down a long corridor and entered the conference room. Zevon sat down at the middle of a long table next to Chief Scientist Zekin and the Speaker of the Supreme Council Zolan. Zachary stood on alert by the side of Zevon. Speaker Zolan summoned Zuriel, the senior research scientist, to the room to brief the Supreme Council of Heliu. Zuriel stepped in and stood before the members of the council. Zekan, Zuriel, how are the mass transfer bots progressing collecting the atomic material? Zuriel thought for a moment how to manage the situation he found himself and his team in. Zuriel, may I reiterate my objection to deployment of the probes on Sol 3. As a scientist, I understand that SOL-class planets are most able to provide us with our required source elements, but we have encountered life forms, and our probes have caused some damage to the local ecosystems. That is not in compliance with our laws. Zevon, it is our divine mission to save our star and our system of planets. We do our best to minimize the damage to local life forms, but what incidental damage that occurs is unavoidable. Zuriel, no, Chief High Priest, I have not forgotten our mission to look for the required source elements for seeding the core of our star Heliu. But with the recent dictum from the Council, the bots have been programmed to search for atomic materials on Sol 3. Zekan, Chief High Priest Zevon, the Dimensional Gate team have received readings from bots that were assigned to the same land mass that the human child came from. And there are strong readings from sites which must be atomic energy plants. Zuriel, Enna, we cannot release the bots to procure these materials. This could lead to atomic radiation contamination at these sites on Sol 3. Zevon, Zuriel, must I remind you of the Grand Council directive to you on this? Zekan, wait, what if we project a dome Annulus? Zuriel, and we extend the temporal anomaly around the atomic material with settings that extend beyond the half-life of any radioactive material. Zekan, exactly, then each transfer of the radioactive material in this manner will transfer all radiation emissions together with the radiative material safely back to Heliu. Zuriel, with all respect to the Council, while I concur with Zekan's suggested approach on minimization of radiation hazards from these materials, I still wish to register my strongest objection to this plan. I require time to research the use of a dome Annulus and the relevant settings as to their total effectiveness to prevent radiation leakage. Zevon gave a stern look at Zuriel and then sort of nodded at Zekan before addressing Zuriel. Zuriel, your strong objections are noted. Chief Scientist Zekan, we shall agree to Zuriel's request for time extension to implementation of the Council's instruction. Zuriel bowed and proceeded back to the Dimensional Gate room to do the research on projection of a dome Annulus for each excursion of the bots to Sol 3. After Zuriel had left, Zevon whispered words into Zekan's ear. Zekan nodded in agreement. From the closed-circuit feed to the control room, Zoe monitored the arrival of the spent nuclear fuel from Earth as they materialized after transiting the Dimensional Gate from Earth. The radiation reading began to climb into the red zone as their mass continued to build up. Zoe was about to stop the transfer of the radioactive materials, shut down the howling siren on radiation hazard, and Zekan stepped up to the control desk and executed a subroutine to project a dome Annulus around the incoming materials and rerouted the spent nuclear fuel to a different gate address. Zekan, Zoe, and everyone take my direct instruction on this. All subsequent transmissions of atomic materials follow this exact procedure. Zuriel is not to hear of this. Is that clear? Over at Zuriel's house, where Jake was being kept under the watchful eyes of a security detail from the High Priest Council. Jake, who was in the guest bedroom, mulling over his predicament, heard a light knock on the window. He went up to the window and looked out, and Zilia was squatting on the common ledge that joined her bedroom and the guest room. She knocked again and signaled him to open the window. Jake swung the window panels inwards and Zilia came in. Zilia, Jake, my father has just messaged me with instructions on your return trip to your planet. I am to assist to prepare you and smuggle you onto a transport that will bring you to the designated building for boarding the mass transfer bot. Jake got up from the bed to his feet. What are we waiting for? Let us go now. Zilia, Jake, not so fast. We must be careful, there are security personnel from the temple guarding our main and rear entrance. But they do not know of the underground passageway we have that takes us to the garden of the second house we have across the road. We can slip out the back way to the transport my father has arranged to bring us to where we must go.